Yes.
Okay, so,
This is
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I also welcome you on this third edition of the Brussels Indo-Pacific Dialogue. And so in this high-level panel, we are going to discuss the Indo-Pacific's evolving importance to the Euro-Atlantic region, which is in fact quite a new feature. It also comes this discussion at a very, I would say, important moment, because a new leadership of the European Union just started 2 days ago. And we are also in the middle of the leadership transition in the United States, where there is much uncertainty around the future of the USC policy towards Ukraine, uncertainty and I would say unpredictability, and more broadly to the transatlantic relationship at large. Of course, seen from a European foreign policy perspective, Ukraine is of the utmost importance for us. Morning. It's a strategic priority and also a very serious problem, I mean, that we are put before. Now, on the other hand, we have seen recently also the deployment of North Korean troops to Russia in the Kursk region. It doesn't seem that they are very effective, but nevertheless they are already there. There is the ongoing support for the Russian aggression by China, covered and less covered. And on the other hand, we have the continued support of Australia, South Korea, Japan, for the Ukraine's fighting for their freedom. Now, also the Indo-Pacific region as such is becoming very important, more and more important, geopolitically, economically, and technologically. I have to say that there's a lot of uncertainty and even angst on what is going to happen there in the coming years within, let's say, the general public in Europe. For them, Taiwan is very far away, because it's much closer, but that maybe makes also that they are more anxious than we are. Now, I think we have today an excellent panel, and it even has just become complete by the entrance of
a very strong woman,
Baiba, the foreign minister of Latvia.
I just landed.
You're also stuck in traffic jams, I could imagine. I mean, I know this.
Nice to be back in Brussels.
Yeah. Now, to my right, you have the distinguished Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada, Mélanie Joly. Looks very French.
Yeah. Oui, c'est francophone. Québécoise.
I've been instrumental in the free trade agreement between the European Union and Canada, so I went there several times. And then we have, of course, Stefano Sannino, who is the Secretary General of the European External Action Service, which is the operative arm, let's say, of the High Representative. And of course, Mr. Sannino, we all know him. I mean, he has had a distinguished diplomatic career in the European institutions and also in his home country, Italy, for many years. So we have not a lot of time. We have roughly 1 hour. And I will start with some questions to our participants. And let me start with a general question to the two European speakers. And maybe I should start with Stefano. It's a very short question, but the answer could be very long. Now, with the worsening situation in Ukraine and the growing uncertainty about the US commitment to Ukraine, what's the bandwidth we still have to focus on the Indo-Pacific? Because, well, we are, let's say, on both fronts, I mean diplomatically. So what is the bandwidth that we still have to pay attention to the Indo-Pacific, and why should we do that? Stefano?
Karel, thank you very much, and thanks for this invitation. Maybe I would start saying something which is rather obvious, but somehow the security, the playing field in terms of security has become global. So it is true that we speak about now about the Indo-Pacific, but as a matter of fact, I think that we can easily add other elements, and you were rightly mentioned the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and one could add also the potential crisis in Africa, or what we are witnessing now in the last few days in Syria. So there is an element of communicating basis among all these crises, which is something that we need to keep in mind, because otherwise if we compartmentalize the security, then we can end up in a difficult place. The second broad element that I would like to highlight is what we are seeing, a sort of stronger connections between Russia and China, this no limits partnership, as a feature of a sort of revisionism that is defining in the world. We speak about the global south, or I don't know if I don't like this expression, maybe the plural south is more defining better this geographic group, but a group of countries which are requesting, let's say, a change. Now, I don't want to amalgamate everything into one, because it would be a mistake, but the idea of China and Russia are pushing forward is again to revise a global order. China is doing it more in a more sophisticated way, Russia in a much more aggressive way, and this is condensating very much in this new gathering of the BRICS Plus, which is now becoming a sort of a pole of attraction for many countries around the world. In this situation, just to zoom in a little bit more into the Indo-Pacific region, I think that what we have been trying to do as European Union in particular, I would say, is the idea of working together with like-minded countries, but I would say also beyond like-minded countries, in order to create as much as possible a strong security and economic network. Essentially, starting from the definition of an Indo-Pacific strategy to the strengthening of our relations with India, to the strategic partnerships with Japan, with the different partnerships with Japan, South Korea, with Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, certainly. Let's say it's going to the Pacific from the other side, but with the group of like-minded countries, we are really trying to define a strong network that can give a sense to I don't want to say it is anti-China network, but to give a sense of all the revisionist powers that there is a willingness on our side to preserve a certain number of basic things, to preserve the freedom of navigation, to fight against any form of economic coercion, to preserve in the context of the One China policy the Taiwan status, to do a number of things which are giving again the indication that one can work, one can negotiate, one can discuss many things, but that the rule of the force of the might cannot prevail. And this is true in Ukraine, and this is true elsewhere. This, in turn, means that essentially we need to keep on working on a number of specific areas. Partnerships, to me, it's the most important one, be it in the green or the digital or the critical raw material, but also in a security and defense partnership. I'm very glad that we have managed just a few days ago to sign the security and defense partnership with Japan and with the Republic of Korea in the region. And this is the best way, I think, that we can have to increase the price and the risk for those who are willing to force changes. You have said, Karel also mentioned, it's my last point, about the work with the United States, which I think it is an essential partner from all points of view. We have launched during this administration, still running Biden administration, a dialogue on China and then consultations on the Indo-Pacific that have been chairing together with the Deputy Secretary of State. And this has been a very precious instrument to align our positions, to have a common awareness of the threat that we were facing, but also trying to define actions that we could do. I'm not saying that in everything we were perfectly aligned. Maybe sometimes the rhetoric on the US side was a little bit more muscular than the one that we use here in the European Union. But still, I think that this has been a very important element in keeping, again, this alignment between the United States and the European Union on an issue which has been crucial in this year, and it will become even more so for this new college, this new commission that has just started, that has put security, both the military but also the economic security and the whole of society security at the center of its action.
Thank you very much, Stefano, and I'm going to ask the same question to you, Minister. I think you pronounce it Braže, that's correct? Okay, thank you.
Goedemorgen. En het is goed hier terug te zijn in Brussel. And thank you so much for having me. And it's good to see old friends in a new capacity. So quickly from Latvian perspective, obviously there are various elements, various blocks, all they are intertwined. Our interests are very much value-based interests in terms of having that sort of peaceful relationship, not only within Europe, but also with other regions. That enables, as Stefano described, of course, economic partnerships. It enables prosperity. It enables everything that we have. But there is a big angle that is indeed raising a lot of concern also in Latvia, in the region. And Mélanie just spent 2 days with us, so she can reflect on that also, which is security. And security in various angles. It's not just, as Mr. de Gucht mentioned, the North Korean troops that are fighting in Russia's war, China enabling Russia's war in various angles, but it's actually development in the region itself, with China developing its nuclear triad with lack of transparency on the intentions, the lack of dialogue, the sort of significant numbers of warheads that are being developed and delivery vehicles. So there's a whole set of both what we know, there are issues that we don't know, but we can, of course, conclude, but then also behavioral aspects with regard to its neighboring states. So that whole security aspect also affects us, because, again, one expression is what will happen in the region itself, how it affects our partners in the region, how it affects our own security via Russia's war of aggression, but then also what effects will it have if Russia succeeds in its war. So all this, of course, affects our decision-making. My first trip outside Europe after appointment was to the region, to Indonesia, Australia, Singapore, and Korea. And obviously, it was quite significant in that respect that the genuine aspect of cooperation between the region and Europe and NATO is there. Again, it's in various angles. Every country makes its own choices where it wants to belong, what associations, what agreements it wants to make. But that genuinity of interest of political, economic, security interest and collaboration is there. And that's why also within NATO we have clearly seen a closer collaboration with the Indo-Pacific partners with regard to the hybrid threats, especially cyber, disinformation, some of the intel exchanges. We see that also as pretty fruitful and rational from the Latvian point of view. We also have those dialogues ongoing. From other hand, EU, of course, have played a very important role for us because it is an enabler for economic relationship. It is an enabler for economic security relationship. It is an enabler for also security and defense aspects, both with regard to the partnerships, but also the data collection, what we are doing as EU member state, but also as institutions in the region. And the numbers speak by itself. After concluding the Korean agreement with the EU, the trade has grown for more than 200%. And so on and so forth. So that speaks by itself. It's a natural sort of way of collaborating also for member states, but also for the institutions with various regions. And where are we going? I think we are going with more familiarity between each other. And that regards not only the 4 Indo-Pacific partners of NATO and the EU, but actually with the other countries. My conversations in Indonesia were pretty straightforward. They are not always happy with what the EU doing in its trade and so on and so forth, to put it mildly. But in the same time, there is a lot of interest and a lot of sort of practical sort of mindset to advance that collaboration and to move ahead with the treaty. The same in Thailand, the same in other countries. So we have to find what are those avenues, what are those abilities for us to continue that, because they bring fruit to all of us. For Latvia, our companies, for example, in Indonesia, it's mostly tech and technology-enabled companies that have that relationship in Indonesia. And one of the biggest providers of routers is a Latvian company. So. And it happened because the EU provided that ability both with regard to Indonesia, with regard to the region, with regard to Vietnam and others. So from that, I think that building that relationship as a bilateral level, working with Pacific countries in NATO, Canada and the US, working within the wider groups of countries that want to bring security relationship closer, but also on a bilateral level is something that we will continue, and we are very comfortable with that.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I have to come to you, Mrs. Mélanie Joly, because Canada is at the crossroads of the Indo-Pacific and the Euro-Atlantic region. You have a lot of strategic depth, also very vast country. Now, the importance of the Indo-Pacific is growing economically, technologically, but also, I think, strategically. And so the question is, what about Canada's engagement with Europe and with NATO? How is that going to evolve? We have very strong links with you. We have a free trade agreement that is working since 5 years or something like that. And we are not going to impose duties on you. It could be Trump does it, but we are not going to do it. So
I won't answer that joke.
it's not a joke. Please.
Thank you. Well, thank you. And I was indeed with Baiba in Latvia yesterday, and it was an important trip. Why? Because Baiba and I had the chance to meet with the Canadian troops that are leading the multinational brigade that is now protecting and deterring any form of Russian threats in Latvia, and we just went through an important exercise. It was indeed the most important exercise led by Canadian troops in Europe in 30 years. We have nearly 2,000 men and women in uniform now in Latvia, and it is a very important commitment to the Euro-Atlantic security. And at the same time, on the Indo-Pacific front, we presented a very, I think, successful Indo-Pacific strategy 2 years ago, which commits $2.3 billion of support to the region. Canada is indeed, because of its geography, but also because of its history, an Indo-Pacific country, and our goal is to make sure that we are a reliable partner. We're now a strategic partner of ASEAN. We've been closer than ever to Japan and Korea. I've been 4 times to these 2 countries, been to the DMZ as well, and had the chance to work on much more of a deepened cooperation with these 2 countries, including on intelligence, including on defense, including on trade. And so, in that sense, I think we're well positioned to connect what is going on in Europe and in the European theater. And of course, we're very much involved in supporting Ukraine, and at the same time, the Indo-Pacific. And I must add that there's an important region between both for us, which is the Arctic. And what we're seeing, because of melting sea ice, we're seeing that there is indeed a very interest of China in making sure that it can go through the Arctic, because by 2050, it will be the shortest route to connect the Indo-Pacific, Asia to Europe. And in that sense, we need to make sure that we up our game also in the Arctic. And what we know also is that while there is greater cooperation between Russia and China, because China is enabling through economic ties with Russia its war against Ukraine, because we're seeing North Korean troops, because we're also seeing the fact that Iran is selling ballistic missiles and drones to Russia, that they're ultimately a unity of different theaters. But going back to the Arctic, what we're seeing is, since now Russia is the junior partner in the relationship with China, Russia is allowing China to be much more present in the Arctic. And so based on that, as we will be chairing the G7 next year, we want to make sure that this is a priority, that we are connecting all the different theaters. And we will be chairing the G7 at a time where there is indeed an upcoming US administration, which we know very well because we've been in government now for 9 years. And we've had the opportunity to deal with President Trump during his first mandate between 2016 and 2020. And as part of our G7, what we want to do is also come up with this maritime security initiative, where we will be addressing sanction circumvention by including China and other countries. We will be addressing shadow fleets issues, which clearly affects Europe. We will be looking at illegal fishing, which is something that we're seeing across the globe, but certainly in the South China Sea. And we'll be looking also at undersea infrastructure, which we know is so important as what happened recently. So these will be the different issues we'll be looking at, but I know you'll have other questions about the Indo-Pacific, and it will be a pleasure for me to answer them.
Thank you. Now, I think it's very important what you're mentioning about the Arctic, because not only for China, but also for Europe, it will become an alternative over time. And you put the importance on the trade that is passing. For about 40% of all trade, it's passing by the Formosa Straits. I mean, sooner or later there could be an alternative. So that certainly does have a geopolitical importance. So you rightly stressed that. But let me go back to Stefano Zannini, for a moment. We have a new leadership. Security and defense will be crucial. The Commission has a geopolitical program, which is not an easy task, by the way. But we also have to mind our competitiveness, and that relates to the economic security and the technological sovereignty agenda that we have. Now, all this, it's a lot. So my question is, how fits the Indo-Pacific in all these EU strategic priorities? Because we are entering a completely new political cycle, both sides. We are definitely evolving in the direction of a great power competition, more and more. We also see that there are in these players who have strengths and weaknesses. For example, I would say that Russia is in a strategic overstretch, and they already are feeling that now in Syria, in Aleppo. So concretely, Stefano, what are we going to do with the Indo-Pacific? How are we going to position ourselves, and how does it fit in our own priorities in the European Union?
Karel, indeed, I mean, I was trying already before to define, let's say, the whole spectrum of the relation, or at least part of the spectrum of the relations that we have developed over these last few years with the region, with the Indo-Pacific region. And I think that what you were saying, both in terms of security, but also in terms of competitiveness, which at the end of the day is another form of ensuring security, because it's bringing more resilience to our societies and more capacity to stand, let's say, the challenges coming from outside. But we will need to expand and strengthen the network that I was saying before we have created during these years. Somehow the coming out to, in particular to China, we have already defined a few years ago what we see our approach to China as a partner, but also as a competitor, a systemic rival. The new High Representative, Ms. Callas, already in her hearing has been in front of the Parliament, has been very clear about the focus and this new lining up of countries is having on our security. She was speaking about Iran, North Korea, Russia, but also about China. So we will need to keep on staying focused on this issue, and to strengthen our de-risking, economic de-risking vis-à-vis China. I mean, I was speaking before about economic coercion. It's something that some of our member states have already witnessed on their own skin, particularly Lithuania. But it is true that the pressure that is coming is very strong, and from that point of view, we need more solidity in this. We need more friends. We have already many in the region, but we need even more friends. We are strengthening our relationship with the Philippines, for example, which is a very relevant actor from that point of view. But we want also to upgrade our relations with Indonesia. Baiba is right in saying that we have some complexities in these relations linked to also to the policies that we have developed, especially on deforestation. With Vietnam, I mean, we need to, again, to broaden and to strengthen this network. And I think that one other area which will be very relevant is that of maritime security. Mrs. Joly was rightly mentioning how important it is to do that, and we have been trying, and we have been doing already for quite some time, a maritime coordinated presence in the region, using the assets of our member state. Always says the European Union is not a military organization, but we are security organization, and that's an important element. Working on disinformation, working on cybersecurity, working on the fight against hybrid threats. These are all parts of this work. I don't know if I can call it deterrence, because it's a big word, but we need, I would say, to be able to show that we will stand by our values, interests, principles. And for me, this is also very important what we are doing in Ukraine, because what we are doing in Ukraine is very carefully looked at in that part of the world. And I think that the new Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, has been very right in pointing out that we need to be able to stand by that. Kaja Kallas is using an even stronger expression than compared with the past, because she said and repeated, we have to win this war. Ukraine has to win this war. And this is important, again, for Ukraine, for us, but for the world. It's not only a question about, let's say, Ukraine. It's a question of an interest that we all share to make it sure that, again, nobody thinks that they can, with the strength of their force, be it military or economic, impose a vision of the world.
Thank you. The picture is not becoming easier with your holistic answer, Stefano. Let me, by the way, say that you say European Union, it's not about defense.
I'm not saying it's not a military difference. I'm not saying it's not about defense. I'm saying that the European Union is not a military organization like NATO is.
But I would say, I mean, we have now for the first time a commissioner for defense.
Yes, yes.
So it will become a very thin line. What does it really mean? Huh? So you can keep the answer for you.
We can discuss this, but that's another story.
But it's true that we have the first time ever a commissioner for defense, which was a little bit interesting. Now let me come back to Minister Braže, and well, we have seen that cooperation between China and Russia is picking up recently, but as you rightly say, they are the smallest partner by far in this relationship with China, and very difficult relationship, I would say, coming together with their strategic overstretch in the north of Africa. So, and the ruble is not going well either. So now, on the other hand, you have the US administration. It could be, in fact, we don't know much about the new administration. Let's be serious about that. We will have to see. But maybe their focus will be less on dividing the world into a democratic and an authoritarian axis. Could very well be that this is erased to a certain extent by this great power competition. Now, Minister Braže, how do you expect from the Baltics on, how do you expect that the Sino-Russian relationship will evolve in the coming years? And it's very important because, as Stefano rightly says, I mean, you have now the high security, you have now the high representative, no? From your region.
And defense commissioner also from the region.
Defense commissioner, well, but that's still, that's it. That we will have to
and
see.
let me start with that. I'm sure EU will never become a military alliance because that is not what it's made for. We have NATO as political military alliance, and it's actually very important that the new defense commissioners, that European defense industry strategy, industry program actually contribute to the same outcomes that we have that are necessary for the defense, which is closing capability gaps that have been identified in the Euro-Atlantic area. And those are specific issues that also European defense base has to contribute to. So it's not something very abstract elsewhere, but it's actually our own companies, our own joint work has to produce that and make sure that our defense and security is as strong as ever. On Russia-China, again, I think the important part is not to sort of make it abstract. It's a very concrete issue currently and for a foreseeable future. Russia's policy is war. There is not a single indicator within Russia that would show that it wants to change this policy. All the instruments of power, military, economic, religion, media, private sector, I mean, just take it. It's all war. So pushing Ukrainians to negotiate for peace is ridiculous. There's nobody to negotiate with. Russia wants war. And it wants war to conquer Ukraine fully and to eradicate that country and nation from the face of earth. And that's what it is. It's been openly stated, so let's not make mistake. So the fact that China is enabling this war for us is a very significant issue. And we've been very open. We sent our state secretary to Beijing 10 days ago to speak about it. We've been open in our conversations, in our public, in our diplomatic statements about it, that we really regret the fact that China is doing this. It has never condemned Russia. It has never said anything to the effect of supporting Ukrainian self-defense and so on and so forth. So that is something that is both strategic but also a very tactical issue. And that's why countries in the Indo-Pacific, in other regions, feel very uncomfortable about it, because they might not be full democracies. They might have a different way of running their countries. But one thing that they don't want is somebody else violating their borders, attacking them, and trying to change the form of governance or anything by force. So when we speak about rules-based international order, that is where the UN Charter comes in, because that was a document ratified by all 193 countries, which set out those principles. And we have to always remember that that is that basic rule that we want our relations with other countries to be based on. China is watching very carefully both what NATO is doing, how Russia is doing in the theater in Ukraine. Russia is overstretched, but also you said Ukraine is facing difficulties. Russia is facing enormous difficulties, both on the front, in its economy, the systemic aspects of the economy. It's just going down the drain, is a polite way to put it. But because the war is a political choice, all the resources will be aligned along the axis of war. So civilian industries, civilian needs will be always subdued to the military. So that's why it will be able to continue to act for a while. And it's up to all of us, not only for the EU or the Americans or the Canadians, but also for Asians, for other countries, for the GCC, and for all the others who want to maintain some civility in our relationships, to actually make sure that Russia doesn't succeed and that we as countries don't do anything enabling that war. So this is where sort of minimum critical denominator comes in for us, and that's why both within my trips, but also within meeting, tens of other ministers and other officials, spending my life in the airplanes, that is why we are so active to make sure that there is no misunderstanding. And no, countries in the Indo-Pacific don't have to choose between the US and China. That's not how it works. They can have their systems of governance, they can have their relationships, they can have their trade. And we are there, of course, to work with them, both as EU, but also as individual countries, as a society at large. So that is where I think it's very important to continue engaging with China, to also clearly identify those issues that are critical for us in terms of security that I mentioned, not only nuclear, but Russia's war and so on and so forth, but also that we all together actually make sure that that big aggressor country that has attacked another country does not succeed. That's why what Kaja Kallas said, that it's essential that Ukraine wins its war, it's as essential for the Baltics as for Indo-Pacific.
Thank you very much, Minister. I have to come back to you, Minister Joly. Your the axis, let's say, of your policy is peace, resilience, and security. Very clearly so. Now, what do you think about the security challenges in the Indo-Pacific at present? You mentioned the Arctic, but it's not only the Arctic, it's also the Formosa Straits. There's political, economic, strategic competition in the Indo-Pacific. And how can we, Europe, Canada, and like-minded partners that you already referenced to, how can they work together on these Indo-Pacific challenges and the challenges for us in the Indo-Pacific? What is the route to take? It seems to me that's one of the biggest problems, actually, that we don't know what is the picture. Where are we really moving in? There's a lot of unpredictability on what the US is going to do in the coming years, and it could continue. You could expect, okay, once there is a new government, then it will be clear. We have a new commission in Europe, it will be clear what the commission wants to do. It's very clear with your government, other governments. It's not clear at all with the US, and we have to work in that environment. So how are we going to proceed?
Yeah. Well, indeed, there are lots of changes in terms of the different leaderships in Europe. Looking forward to working with Kaja, who's a good friend. NATO also. Baiba and I are going to the foreign ministers meeting at NATO with Mark Rutte being there in the context of our own meeting for the first time as Secretary General. And of course, also the US administration. But I think what Europeans need to understand better, to be frank, is how much the US-China competition is not only fundamental, but is the only competition that can ultimately lead to an international conflict. And this Trump administration is composed of China hawks. And China will be the most important geopolitical priority for the Trump administration. Rubio, the new Secretary of State, is such a China hawk that he's sanctioned by China, which of course the Chinese are trying to figure out what will happen because they need an interlocutor. And there's really a feeling in North America that there's a form of naiveness, when it comes to Europeans versus China.
Is that true?
I think so.
That we are naive?
Well, I think that China's strategy is to divide North America and Europe. And so in that sense, I think that we're still looking at what China's reaction will be in the coming days, adapting to the Trump administration. But I fundamentally think that China's strategy has not changed. Its tactics has changed. And so I was in China last June, first visit in years, and it was a positive conversation, but ultimately we agreed to disagree on many, many different aspects, including many priorities that are core to Canadians' interests. And I must say, to many of our allies. And so in terms of trade, for example, what you can see coming from the US administration is tariffs. Tariffs on China, which has already been announced, but tariffs also on countries that are enabling China's economy against the US. What is also coming is, you saw the tweet on Truth Social by President-elect Trump regarding BRICS. The fact that the US dollar could be weakened is something that the Trump administration will not accept, and including the creation of a potential BRICS currency. I'm not saying that, they won't accept not to do anything. And they will expect their allies also to support the US currency. On defense, what we're seeing right now, the different behaviors used by China in the South China Sea is not only against UNCLOS, the International Rules-Based Order, etc., but it is fundamentally putting the interests of many of our Asian allies and partners at risk. And you saw what happened with the Philippines recently. Anytime you have conversations with colleagues and friends in Vietnam, in Indonesia, Baiba was referring to it, it is a real preoccupation. And there is incremental change that is happening in the South China Sea that our Asian partners are seeing, and that they have issues of not being able to fight back. And they expect us to help them diplomatically first, and eventually, if diplomacy is not working, much more cooperation on the security side. The Taiwan Strait. If there would be a different approach to China, by China to the Taiwan Strait, this would have an economic hit to the world economy, and of course to Europe's economy and to North America's economy.
That's the most dangerous piece of the game,
Of course.
Taiwan Strait.
And that would be greater than COVID.
Yep.
And so that's why also that we need to be standing strong on the question of the fact that we need to be able to go through the Taiwan Strait. And Canada has been the country going through the Taiwan Strait with the US through our frigates the most time, even more than any European allies. And we have 3 frigates in the Indo-Pacific. There is an issue also that is not a lot discussed here in Europe, but that we're concerned back home, is that there is a security infrastructure within the Euro-Atlantic, which is NATO. There's none in the Indo-Pacific. And it's very difficult to have any form of discussions about NATO's presence in the Indo-Pacific. So what are you seeing? You're seeing minilaterals. You're seeing AUKUS, which is much more a nuclear submarine deal. You see the Quad with India, where there are conversations, but it's not a security infrastructure. You see Camp David, that was developed by the Biden administration, with bringing Japan and South Korea together, along with the U.S. And we're pushing also for much more a North Pacific 4, which would be South Korea, Japan, U.S., and Canada, because we believe that the North Pacific must be protected. But we're doing all these minilaterals because ultimately there's not a real security architecture, which I think in time will have to be implemented, will have to be developed and implemented. And last point, what the US administration and the Trump administration will be focused, and you see who is around Mar-a-Lago these days, is AI space. And that US-China competition is also through the issue of AI. And what does AI need in life? Energy. And you'll see a lot of resources in the US to be able to put a lot of investments in energy, because they will be very focused in winning the AI competition against China. So that's why I really think that the Indo-Pacific it must be even more of an important priority for Europe. That's why when Baiba said to me, Mel, why don't you come and do this Indo-Pacific panel with me, I said yes, because I really think that Canada can be the country that can help understand how the US thinks, and maybe because I'm Québécoise and Francophone, but also explain to Americans sometimes a bit how Europe thinks.
Thank you. Now your role becomes even more crucial, but not less easy. So